It's a mystery that has lasted for over 43 years, from that day when the sudden disappearance of a man who was liked by everyone, who presented himself as the man of the smile, the man of dialogue, and who suddenly, without any warning signs of any kind, disappears, leaving an entire community, the community of Catholic Christians, in doubt, in bewilderment. We're talking about Albino Luciani, Pope John Paul I, the first pope to choose a double name, no one before him, the first pope to break taboos, to say that God is not only Father but also Mother, the Pope who represented himself as a character also breaking with the previous church, a church made not only of dogmas, not only of secularized rituals, and above all, a kind of immobility. He was supposed to be an innovative, renewing pope, but a pope who only lasted 33 days, and on whose death, that therefore inexplicable death, all sorts of things have been said. But who was Albino Luciani? He was a man of the mountains. He was born in Canale di Agordo in Belluno. He grew up there in harsh, mountainous, even rather poor conditions. Then he entered the seminary. He went through all the classic steps. Then he became bishop of Vittorio Veneto, and from there he began what could be called the ladder. So always using a clear, precise position within the church, obtaining certificates of esteem already during the Second Vatican Council, the one opened by John 23, then by Paul VI, Montini, his predecessor, but it will not be known for him. He also became, among other things, a Cardinal Patriarch of Venice, an old tradition that still dated back to Aquileia. Well, Albino Luciani always presented himself as the man of dialogue, the man of the smile, the man of goodness, the man capable of dialoguing with everyone, except with certain people. People that he had met during his term as Patriarch of Venice and whom he met again after his election, an election that officially took place on August 26th, 1979. Paul VI has already been dead for a while. Paul VI, who had inaugurated a long pontificate, also dictated by a different culture, the first pope to travel abroad, and then the sudden death of Paul VI, however, announced of his health problems, which opens a new conclave, a conclave in which it is not known what direction will be taken by the cardinals, especially for what will be the future strategy of the election of Albino Luciani, of that cardinal who came from the northeast of Italy, a cardinal with such a poor history, poor family background, who knew how to speak to the least, seems to give a further signal, a very decisive signal, the will to go beyond what had already been the first signals of Paul VI, those that had been the encouraging signals of John 23, who had spoken to the people, had spoken to the families. Very little, because it's 33 days. It's not the shortest pontificate in history, but it's not far off. 33 very intense days. 33 days in which Albino Luciani understands all the difficulties of holding the pontifical chiara, all the harshness that hides within the muralline, and there are really many, Among other things, Albino Luciani encounters a character with whom he had clashed a few years earlier when he was Patriarch of Venice. That character was named because in the meantime he also died, Paul Casimir Marcinkus, an American Monsignor bishop put in charge of the Institute of Religious Works, improperly called the Vatican Bank and 50 Alza. Marcinkus and Luciano had clashed precisely when Luciano was patriarch, because Marcinkus had endorsed the accession of the Catholic Bank of Veneto to the Ambrosiano, run by Roberto Cari, a famous banker. A financial operation that Albino Luciani did not like, especially because it had been carried out in the dark of those who were the reference shareholders of the Catholic Bank of Veneto, that is, the dioceses of Veneto and Friuli, which have always used that bank to deposit their funds and the offerings of the Germans. It's something that Albino Luciano did not like. And already in that situation, he, the Patriarch of Venice and that obscure bishop, arrived from Cicero in Illinois, had also clashed in a fairly right way. Marcinkus used to say that the church does not move forward with Hail Marys, and that without money nothing can be done, not even charity. Two completely different visions, not only of Christianity, but also of pragmatism. Inside the Vatican, Albino Luciani finds Marcinkus again. It's clear there's no sympathy. There can't be any sympathy, but there are also other characters who are not overly satisfied and happy with the election of Albino Luciani. For example, there is Cardinal Jean Villot, the very powerful Vatican Secretary of State. He, too, is not enthusiastic about the arrival of Albino Luciani, perhaps because he thought he could have even more power with a more accommodating and less interventionist pope. The Giammio's deputy, whom we will find later, is Cardinal Agostino Casaroli, another very heavy name within him, then hereditary. These are all characters that, for better or worse, Albino Luciani must learn to know a little better in his days as the new bearer of the fisherman's ring. And there is also an event that occurs a few days after his election. There is a newspaper, it's called Political Observer. For everyone, it simply publishes, with a dedicated cover, in an investigation into an alleged Masonic lodge in the Vatican. That is a kind of absolute crush right on the throne of Peter. Freemasonry, which was excommunicated in the 18th century and has always been seen by the ecclesiastical hierarchy as a thorn in the side, not accepting Catholic religious dogmas, would be present with its own lodge populated by prelates within the Vatican itself. Whether it's a rumor, whether it's a provocation by Mino Pecorelli, director of OP, whether they are suggestions, whether there is some truth, Albino Luciani wants to see clearly. He starts an investigation whose results he will never see. He will never see, because on September 28th, 1978, Albino Luciani, it will be said that he took a book limitation of Christ to bed. This too then turns out to be true, and the news gesta in the consternation, billions of Catholics who die in charge open a sort of hell's gate as far as all the various conspiracy theories are concerned. The first idea is that Albino Luciani was killed, perhaps with poison, but by whom and why? Sure, if you want, there is no shortage of moments. We said Luciani was a pope different from his predecessors. He was a somewhat revolutionary pope. He was a pope that many cardinals might not like, but that a cardinal or a group of cardinals could resort to murder.
Grossa come ipotesi.
Then how? There's talk of a poisoned herbal tea, talk of an enema of toothpaste, talk of a sentiment. There are so many hypotheses. There's a journalist, a British journalist, Daniel Gallup, who writes a book, a pamphlet that will be a bestseller, and today is literally untraceable. It's titled The Name of God. It's an investigation into the death of Albino Luciani, an investigation that digs into what could have been the motivations from the many enemies of Albino Roussel, but it doesn't fully clarify. What is certain is that the Pope dies and that above all, no autopsies performed. It's also quite important to say that David Jalup's thesis has quite a grip on the Catholic world, and not only. Jalop mentions Jean Vignon, Agostino Casaroni, and especially Paul Casimir Marcinkus by name. Jalop implies that it was Marcinkus himself who plotted to kill Albino Luciani. The motive? Simple. He has already announced Luciani's own intention to completely reform Martian finances and move away as soon as possible. But the simple, would this be the motivation that would have pushed that American bishop of Lithuanian origin to the decisive step, to the Luciferian pact, to the will to kill Christian representatives? But they are not there because there is no fuchsia. There is no toxicological examination. It is not known if Albino Luciani was actually killed with poison. Maybe even a digitalis, as we know the rents. Yet when Albino Luciani is found breathless in his own bed, in addition to the pain of the Vatican staff, the most diverse theories start. Some of these will also take hold in the mafia environment, so much so that a few years later a repentant of Cosa Nostra to Vincenzo Calvi told the judges that even within Cosa Nostra there was talk of the desire to kill that uncomfortable pope who stood against certain power groups. Because there were no Marcindas, there is Roberto Calvi, there is the P2, there is the mafia banker, Pippo Colò. There really is an underworld of rather ambiguous characters, to put it kindly. Well, even Vincenzo Calcara's statements do not find an adequate contradiction. There's not an element that can clarify whether Albino Luciani was killed or not. The investigative theories that alternatively start in the following years instead indicate the fact that Albino Luciani might have felt really bad that evening, that he might have had a heart attack. He had already had problems before, and heart diseases were historically present in his family. So it could have been an illness, a fatal illness, an illness perhaps accompanied by a failure to provide assistance. Luciani would have felt bad, but no one heard.
Oppure
calling for help. These are the two prevailing theories in the death of Albino Luciani, Pope John III. What is certain is what happens next. Afterwards, an extraordinary event occurs. The election of the first non-Italian pontiff after practically half a millennium will fall to a Pole, Karol Wojtyla. John Paul II chooses to name himself after his predecessor, almost as if to indicate a desire to continue a certain course of action.
Terror, but
The pontificate of John Paul II will be a wall, but it's not just a matter of John Paul II being elected. It's even said with the determined votes of Opus Dei, the Opus Dei to which John Paul II himself will grant the agonized prelature, making Opus a very powerful congregation. Under the pontificate of Karol Wojtyla, there will be other congregations that will grow a lot. Think of the Legionaries of Christ, movements that within the church become like currents that move power, money, and obviously personalities. Under the pontificate of John Paul II, we will reach the closure of the great scandal of two Ambrosians. There are no names of other relatives. Then the tragedy of the Pratineri Bridge, the discovery of the hanged body of Romano Calvi, the scrap of the Ambrosiano, the patronage letters that had been issued by Marcinkus to protect the enormous debt that the Vatican Bank had with the Ambrosiano. Only thanks to the interest of a pool of banks that takes on a good part of the it will be a pontificate initially very troubled, a pontificate stained by accusations of collusion with the regimes of South America, Argentina, the generals, Chile, Pinochet. It will be a pontificate at least initially very marked by anti-communism. The same John Paul II at a certain point would have threatened to move to Krakow, in his Krakow, to personally support Solidarność, the union led by his friend Lech Walesa, who is opposing in those months the regime of Irene Ghiaruselli. After there will be another pontificate, a more open pontificate, less militant, more evident, more focused on the spiritual branch and less on politics. But then there is to ask, would we have seen all this with Albino Luciani too?
he had ideas.
Different. He would never have sought direct confrontation with the Soviet Union and its directors. He would never have suffered an attack like that of Alienska in St. Peter's Square. He would never have gone to protect the culprits of the Ambrosiano crash until the end. History has alternatively decided that Albino Luciani was killed or died of a sudden and obviously not mild heart disease. We will never know what that man from Canal de Gordo, who proposed himself with a smile, with kindness, with a light spirit, and a sweet voice towards both his faithful and the whole world, could have done. We will never know because he didn't have time. He won't even have time to know the results of that investigation he had ordered on the alleged Vatican Lodge, an investigation that will then produce a dossier in which the name of Marcinkus will be found, but not only his, in the name of many cardinals and many prelates, some of whom saw in Albino Luciani actually an opponent, not to say an enemy. It's been over 43 years since Albino Luciani passed away, and even today we not only do not know how things really went, but we do not even know what Albino Luciani could have, and especially wanted to do to improve a church, a Catholic church that was going through a period of great contrasts, of great changes, and that needed a sure guide, but perhaps different, both from Montini and from Montini.